Hello runners! In today's video we're going to talk about why running slow actually makes you run fast. There's a lot of videos about this on YouTube, but nobody really goes into the science behind it, which can really unlock your full running potential. So let's get stuck into it. First off, what does running slow actually look like? Well, it makes it turtle look fast if you're like me, but it's actually a hard question to answer, so let's unpack it. Now, this is probably the biggest can of worms to answer, but generally, slow running we can define using our heart rate zones. So if you're using heart rate zones to measure your exercise intensity, I'd categorize slow running as running at zone 2 or below if you're using a 5-zone system, which is generally pretty popular, or zone 1 if you're using a 3-zone heart rate system. Now, there's a lot of other intensity measures like heart rate reserve and even using your pace as well to help measure exercise intensity, but you'll probably have to figure out the equivalent pacing for them. However, if you're a complete newbie, then you can use the old talk test as a good example of your exercise intensity. So if you're holding a conversation easily, or you can hold a conversation, then I'd categorize that as slow running. If you're huffing and puffing, can't get a sentence out, then that's too fast to be categorized as slow running. So that's what running slow is defined as, but what does that mean for our body? Well, underpinning our heart rate zones and markers of exercise intensity is our energy systems which allow us to run. Now let's talk about some basic physiology, which I promise will be very simple, and talk about our energy systems and how they power our running. It's not just about the pace, it's about understanding the science, because that's going to help us understand why running slow makes us fast. So our body has two main types of energy systems to produce something called ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which is basically our energy currency within the body. We have an aerobic system and we have two anaerobic energy systems. So aerobic means with oxygen or in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic means without the presence of oxygen or not in the presence of oxygen. Our aerobic system produces energy using carbohydrates and fats and typically powers running at our slow to moderate intensity exercise, as this generally requires a lower rate of ATP. So we don't need it as fast, so our aerobic system can handle that, which basically makes it sustainable exercise. We also have two anaerobic energy systems, which means without oxygen, being anaerobic glycolysis and our ATP-PC energy systems. Now, you'll see varying terms for all these energy systems, but I use anaerobic glycolysis and ATP-PC when I'm talking about those two systems. Now, the key with these energy systems is that they can produce ATP a lot faster than our aerobic system, but in the case of anaerobic glycolysis, this comes at a cost because we're producing energy without oxygen, which means that we have some metabolic byproducts which tend to hinder and disrupt exercise and increase fatigue levels. Now, this is where we get to an important point. So running slowly mostly targets our aerobic energy system, and within that a high proportion of slow twitch muscle fibers within the muscle itself. This means for the most part that running is a sustainable exercise that we can do for a few hours, a couple of hours, whatever it might be, depending on your experience level and your ability to oxidize carbohydrates and fats primarily. So running slow also means that we won't accumulate a lot of waste products, or we probably won't apply a lot of force that requires a lengthy recovery for the body, which we would see with faster sustained running that uses a lot more anaerobic energy to provide that ATP for our body. So all these elements are key in the question of why running slow actually makes us run fast. We can run sessions for longer and we can run them more frequently each week compared to high intensity running. But how does running sessions for longer and more frequently each week allow us to run faster? Well, let's connect the dots and see how it all comes together. So with consistent training at slow intensities or slow runs, our bodies can undergo some pretty remarkable adaptions. Now, there's a lot of adaptions, but I'll focus on a couple of main ones. Firstly being an increase in our number of capillaries we have, which are tiny little blood vessels that allow us to carry more oxygen to the muscles to prolong sustained exercise. And secondly, we have an increase or a lot of adaptions surrounding our mitochondria. So we actually increase our mitochondria, which we know from biology is called the powerhouse of the cell, basically where we produce our ATP for energy. More mitochondria is good for three key reasons, but probably many more. Firstly, we increase the amount of energy we can produce using the aerobic energy system, which is more sustainable. Secondly, we also increase the amount of fat we use as energy. Ideally, we want to use carbohydrates as they are more efficient to use for ATP compared to fats, but carbs are limited in our body during exercise, whereas we have heaps of fat. Fat generally require greater oxygen to actually use during exercise, but burning more fat means we can spare our carbohydrates in the form of glycogen to store more glycogen for later on in our races. Thirdly, with an increase in mitochondria, we can remove waste products that accumulate during high intensity exercise. So when we kick up the speed or the intensity of our runs, we're engaging our anaerobic energy systems more because we require a faster rate of ATP, but with that comes more fatiguing byproducts such as things like lactate. With more mitochondria, however, we can remove things like lactate, which allows us to sustain high intensity running for longer, which can make us better runners overall. Now, you might assume that running faster is the only path to become faster, but here's the twist. Somewhat counterintuitively, running at high intensities doesn't necessarily mean that we'll get better at removing things like lactate. We will, obviously, to a degree, but it's actually the infrastructure we build with our capillaries and increased mitochondria that we are creating at lower intensities, which is going to help clear them at high intensity exercise. This is because we know that lactate is higher in fast twitch fibers, which are powering our faster running at higher intensities, but lactate is mainly cleared by our slow twitch fibers, which we've talked about before. So with an increase in mitochondria in our slow twitch fibers, we can actually oxidize and get rid of the lactate that will accumulate at higher intensity exercise. So the key to improve the removal of waste products at high intensities is to train at slow paces like we've just discussed. So the bottom line is this, and we'll use a bit of an analogy. Slow running is the foundations of your house. It's the brickwork, it's the concrete slab, whereas the high intensity running is all the things that rely upon the brickwork and the concrete slab. So fast running might steal the spotlight, but it's the slow running that's going to underpin your success as an endurance runner. There you have it, a detailed breakdown of why slow running actually makes us faster. If you found this video enlightening, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, do all those good things if you got any use out of the video. But until next time, make running great again, and we'll see you soon. So our body has two main types of energy systems to produce this thing called adenosine triphosphate. Fuck, I can't even say it. With consistent training So the bottom line is this. Slow running is So fast running might steal the spotlight. It's funner, it's sexier, it's better to put on Instagram, but it's the slow running that's going to set you